Springfield, Missouri, in the wee hours of June 7, 1992. Three women, Susie Streeter, her mother Cheryl Levitt, and Susie's friend, Stacy McCall, turn in for the night. But sometime between the hours of 2 a.m. and 9 a.m., the unthinkable happens, and they were never heard from again, with only a dog named Cinnamon as a witness. They will forevermore be known as the Springfield Three. This is Night Owl. Good evening, my fine law-abiding citizens. I'm Ted, your host, and welcome back to Night Owl. Now, the story we're going to talk about tonight is a little bit older than the stories we normally talk about. It's an unsolved case from 1992, but just because it's a case that's over 30 years old and still unsolved doesn't mean it has to remain unsolved, right? This case is from Springfield, Missouri, nicknamed the Queen of the Ozarks and the birthplace of Route 66. It's also been referred to as the Buckle of the Bible Belt. It was also the home of three women. A 47-year-old single mother named Cheryl Levitt, her 19-year-old daughter Susie Streeter, as Susie's friend, 18-year-old Stacy McCall. I guess their story actually begins on June 6, 1992 at about 4 p.m. Cheryl was sitting in an auditorium, watching her daughter and her daughter's friends graduate from high school. She was so very proud of her daughter, and as for her daughter and friends, they couldn't be more excited. And why shouldn't they be? I mean, just think of what a high school graduation is. For youngings, it represents one chapter of life closing, while a brand new one opens up. And these kids are no longer just children, but they're taking their very first steps into becoming actual adults. What could be more exciting than that? And what did Susie and Stacy plan to do immediately following graduation? Why, the same thing most people do in that situation. They planned to party, and who could blame them? Of course. There was some things they had to do before that. Like Stacy, for example. Her mom wanted to take some pictures of her in front of her graduation cake. And she was even presented with a graduation gift, a Cocker Spaniel puppy. Wow. Speaking as a dog lover, that's one hell of a gift. Anyway, after that, she was supposed to head over to a friend's place, Janelle Kirby's. Once there, she was supposed to have supper with the Kirby family, then head over to Janelle's neighbor's house for a graduation party. Susie was supposed to meet Stacy at Janelle's place for supper, but first she made a little pit stop at the DeMars residence. She went to visit a friend of hers, a guy named Nigel Kennedy. She had a few pictures taken of herself and Nigel. Then afterwards, she took off to the Kirby residence herself. Now, Cheryl was invited to have supper with the Kirby family, but she declined. The original idea was to go to the graduation party at Janelle's neighbor's house. Then Stacy, Susie, and Janelle would take off together to a Branson motel where the three of them would spend the night. The next morning, they were supposed to hook up with a bunch of their friends to go to the Whitewater Water Park. However, Stacy's mom wasn't too keen on this idea. She told Stacy that it probably wasn't too bright of an idea to be driving after consuming adult beverages. To this, Stacy actually agreed, so they changed their plan. Stacy told her mom that they will not take off to Branson right after the party, and they'll postpone their trip till the following morning. So Susie, Stacy, and Janelle went to Janelle's neighbor's place for the party. Of course, seeing how the original plan to take off to Branson right after the party has been changed, they came up with a new plan. The three of them, plus a few other friends, decided to carpool and go to some other friends' parties in Springfield. I'm not exactly sure how that was a better idea, but hey. So Stacy called her mom to inform her of the new plan, to which she told her mom,
"Mom, don't worry, we're not going to Branson tonight."
Their new plan that they decided on was to just meet up with their friends at Whitewater between 8 and 8:30 a.m. the following morning. So they went to check out a few parties. Last party they went to was at Stacy's friend's house named Michelle Elder, but it was broken up by the cops at about 1:50 a.m. Well, you know what they say, it ain't a party until the cops show up. Anyway, originally, Susie and Stacy were supposed to stay at Janelle's place, but it actually seemed a little bit crowded over there. So at about 2 a.m., Susie and Stacy decide to head back to Susie's house. Then they'd hook up with Janelle later on, and then the three of them would take off to Whitewater together. But Susie and Stacy never did return. and Janelle never saw her friends again. A little bit later in the day, about 9 a.m., Janelle grew concerned about her friends. They were supposed to show up back at Janelle's place, but they were a no-show. So Janelle, along with her boyfriend, went over to Susie's house. Janelle had later told the police that,
I started getting worried because Stacy, she's so responsible and so is Susie. I know they wouldn't just take off without telling us they weren't going to Whitewater.
once there, one of the first things they noticed was the lampshade for a porch light had been shattered, but the light bulb itself was still intact. The next thing they noticed was that the front door was unlocked. So they, of course, walked in. And who did they find in the house? No one. Not Susie, not Stacy, not even Susie's mother, Cheryl, even though each of their cars was parked in the driveway. But there's something weird about that, though. It was Susie's car. You see, she always parked in the carport, but not this time. It was parked in a different spot in the driveway. Now, I know that may not sound too weird, but Susie's friends pretty much all said that Susie is a creature of habit. And there's only one reason why she'd be parked in a different spot, and that would be because someone else was already parked in the carport before she got home. Pretty much the only thing that greeted them at Susie's house was, well, Cinnamon. That would be their Yorkshire Terrier. And she did seem pretty agitated. With no sign of their friends, however, Janelle and her boyfriend decided to go to a water park that was right in Springfield itself. I guess that's what some people do. The friends go missing, and instead of calling the police, they go directly to a water park. I mean, it's not what I would have done, but hey, who am I to judge? Anyway, as they were on their way out, the phone rang. So Janelle answered it and was greeted with an obscene phone call. And I mean really obscene. This dude was dropping F-bombs left and right. At any rate, she hung up the phone and the guy called her right back. She said it was pretty disturbing. But she also recalled Susie mentioning that she's been getting phone calls like that ever since she moved in with her mother in the spring of '92. And Susie had told Janelle that she has reported it to the police in the past. Janelle had said that the caller sounded like he was kind of teenish. After the gross phone calls, Janelle and her boyfriend left. But she wasn't the only one that stopped in at Susie's house that day. Several hours after she left, Stacy's mom, Janice, stopped by Susie's house. You see, she had been trying to get a hold of her daughter the whole day. Oh hell, she even contacted some friends that knew some of the employees that worked at Whitewater. Janice's panic really started to grow when they said that they have not seen Susie or Stacy at Whitewater either. So she headed over to Susie's house. When she arrived, much like Janelle, she was greeted by Cinnamon. She said the dog came running up, yipping and crying. The poor thing really seemed upset. At any rate, Janice took a tour of the house. When she got to Susie's bedroom, she found each of the young women's purses in the middle of the room. When she checked them out, she discovered that Cheryl's purse still contained the deposit of almost $900 from the salon that she worked at. Janice also found makeup wipes belonging to both Susie and Stacy, along with their jewelry and keys. She also found her daughter Stacy's clothing neatly folded on the floor. It was the only clothing that she brought with her. But there was something missing, though. Stacy's t-shirt and underwear were nowhere to be found. She did, however, find Cheryl's and Susie's cigarettes. Now this in itself is kinda odd. You see, Cheryl was considered to be somewhat of a chain smoker, so it is kind of unlikely that she'd take off anywhere without her cigarettes. And next to Susie's cigarettes was an unfinished can of Coke. And on her headboard was a Dr. Seuss book entitled, Oh, the Places You'll Go. There was no lights on in Susie's room when Janice first entered. The only thing that was illuminating the room came from the TV. Of course, all the screen was displaying was snow. It was almost like they had watched a movie and just never bothered to turn the TV off after the movie was done. Using the house phone at Cheryl's house, Stacy's mother called the police to report the 3 women missing. After she was done talking to the cops, she listened to a new message on Cheryl's answering machine. She said it was a very strange message, but unfortunately, that message was accidentally erased. The police said that they would have loved to be able to hear that message, and that they do not believe that message was connected to the prank calls that either Susie or Janelle had received. Hey, it might have even contained a clue. But I guess we'll never know, will we? Of course, that's not the only bit of evidence the police think they may have lost. You see, When word got out that the three women went missing, friends and family more or less converged on the house. And no, they did not just stay on the sidewalk. In fact, the police estimated that the crime scene was contaminated by anywhere from 10 to 20 people. Now, make no mistake, most of them did indeed have the best intentions. They were doing things like cleaning up the place, throwing the trash out, dumping out ashtrays, and even washing up the coffee cups. They probably thought they were doing a good deed. You know, getting the place beautified for when they return. But what they actually wound up doing was accidentally throwing out what could have been evidence. I mean, I get where they're coming from, but what they should have done is just let the cops do their job. In fact, the Springfield Police Department's Rick Bookout had said what the scene looked like when he arrived, and I quote,
"When I arrived, the first thing I noticed were several people in the yard. The door was open, and people were coming and going from inside the house."
Wow, that doesn't sound like it helps anyone, does it? Anyway, the police were able to determine that it didn't seem like there was a struggle. All of the three ladies' belongings were still there, and Susie's bed looks like it was slept in. There was, however, a window blind that was bent at kind of an odd angle. Aside from that, the only other thing that might indicate a struggle was the shattered lampshade on the porch. But seeing how the broken glass was cleaned up by Janelle and her boyfriend, they may never know if there was actually any additional evidence, like blood from a scratch or something like that in the glass. During the week that followed this, all three of the women had different appointments. Stuff like doctor's appointments or just scheduled shifts for their jobs. But none of them made it to any of their appointments. Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy were never seen again. Now, just because the cops lost quite a bit of evidence in the first 24 hours does not mean that they did not come up with a list of suspects, because they did. Suspects like Dustin Rickla, for example. He was an ex-boyfriend of Susie and not exactly the kind of guy you'd want to bring home to mom. You see, old Dustin got into a bit of trouble with the police. But that's what happens when you break into a mausoleum to steal about $30 worth of gold fillings from a skull. And he and his two buddies, who helped, might have got away with it too, if not for being turned in by Susie. In fact, according to the rumor mill, Susie was all set to be a witness for the prosecution against her now ex-boyfriend and his two buddies. The three of them was known to be together and in the area at the time of the disappearance. Then there's a guy named Larry Dwayne Hall. He's a dude that traveled throughout the Midwest performing Civil War reenactments. These reenactments took place during the months of March, June, August, and September between 1980 and 1994. But there's something else you need to know about Larry. He also left a shadow of terror in his wake. He was accused of abducting, essaying, and unaliving dozens of women, and his patterns seemed to match perfectly with the route he took going on his Civil War tour. And it's important to note that there were actually several Civil War reenactments in the general area of Springfield during the time that the three women went missing. There was an FBI agent named Jimmy Keene, whose job it was to, while pretending to be an inmate, befriend Larry. You know, in hopes of earning Larry's trust that he'll spill the beans. And spill the beans he did. He confessed to several of his crimes, and some of the information only the offender could have possibly known. Larry even showed Jimmy a map he had that showed the location of where his victims were buried. But unfortunately, once Jimmy revealed who he actually was to Larry, the map seems to have disappeared. But he still remains a suspect. Then there's a guy named Gerald Carnahan. He was tried and convicted of the 1985 SA and unaliving of a woman named Jackie Johns. His conviction actually was handed down about 15 years after the fact. And at the time, he was also given other convictions, such as the attempted abduction of a young lady, a few years after he did what he did to Jackie. He also had ties to the Galloping Goose biker gang. Now, there was a rumor going around that this motorcycle gang was actually involved in the disappearance of the three women. Mostly because of this one member, some dude named Stephen Garrison. He was convicted of SA, but according to the police, Steve actually gave some pretty credible information about the missing women from Springfield. Both Gerald and Steve are in prison right now. Well, that's convenient. If they ever want to talk to either one of them, then they know exactly where to find them. And of course, there's been others over the years, most of which was not at all credible. Some seem to just be looking for street cred. I'm not too sure why someone would do that. I mean, Imagine if they actually believed you and sent you to prison solely based on your confession, even though you had nothing to do with it. You'd be sitting there, across from your cellmate named Bubba, wondering why you didn't just keep your mouth shut. Of course, even though it's a pretty old case, that doesn't mean there hasn't been developments over the years. Like in December 1992, for example, someone called the hotline for the great American TV show called America's Most Wanted. This guy seemed to have what they called prime knowledge about the case, but unfortunately, when the switchboard tried to transfer the call to the Springfield investigators, the call got dropped. They pretty much begged him to call back, but this guy was never heard from again. Geez, that's such a shame. Then in 2007, acting on a tip that was received, a crime reporter named Kathy Baird asked a mechanical engineer named Rick Norland to use ground-penetrating radar on the corner of a parking garage, which is where, according to the tip, the bodies were buried. When he used the ground-penetrating radar, it most definitely did uncover something. 3 anomalies. It did appear to be a grave site. These anomalies were close together and did appear to be bodies. And once they heard this, the cops did absolutely nothing. They said, and I quote,
"A person who reported the tip provided no evidence or logical reasoning behind this theory at that time or since then."
And they pretty much said that it simply would be too tough to dig up the parking lot, and they doubted that anything was there because the parking lot was built about a year after the disappearance. As for the prosecution, they didn't really help when it came to this tip either. They said that the tip came from someone that claimed that they seen it in a vision or a dream. Wow, I think the cops really dropped the ball on that one. Now, do I think this tipster was psychic? Hell no. I think they just threw the psychic thing in to explain how they knew. Personally, and make no mistake, this is just my opinion, I think the tipster knew where the bodies were because they may have had something to do with the disappearance, either directly or indirectly. Maybe they didn't have anything to do with the disappearance themselves. Maybe they knew because someone told them, but the fact is the ground-penetrating radar definitely discovered something, and it should be investigated. Well, I still have faith though. I know it's been like 33 years and it's still unsolved, but that doesn't mean it's going to remain that way. As for tips, well, they still come in, and all it takes is the right tip for this case to be solved. Maybe a tip you have may actually hold the key. So if anyone out there has any additional information about these 3 women, then please reach out and call the Springfield Police Department in Missouri at 417-864-1810. Remember, the tip that you give might take an unsolved case and turn it into a solved case. Oh, what do you think? Do you think this case will ever be solved? Or do you think it's going to remain a mystery for all time? Please let me know in the comments. And as always, please remember to hit like, subscribe, and to share this video. It really does help me out. Until next time, remember, be you good or be you wicked, everyone deserves justice. Good night.